Hello, and thank you for joining us for the next episode of the Digital Transformation of the Legal Industry webinar series. This episode will discuss an SLW digital transformation case study in due diligence, freedom to operate studies, landscape studies, portfolio curation, portfolio analytics, landscape analytics, examiner and attorney analytics. This is the 6th episode in an 8-part series. If you missed any of the previous episodes, you can find recordings on the SLW Institute on the SLW website. A recording of the webinar and the slides will be made available to all registrants. Feel free to enter any questions using the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu. We'd love to see questions, so definitely don't hesitate to type those right in. We also invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to see news about other upcoming webinars. And with that, I'll turn things over to our moderator.
Hey, thanks, Michelle. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. We have yet another presentation today that's enlightening, and also will give a very nice overview of all the tools that we use that are lean on the analytics side or the due diligence side of the practice. We're going to have we have a great lineup of speakers starting on your left there with Sunil Arora. Sunil is one of our principals and very senior practitioner in MedTech in particular, but does a lot of electronics and, as well. And Sunil is an expert in FTOs, so he'll be talking about how we do FTOs and the tools we use for FTOs that help us. Milena's on the panel today, and she'll be discussing or adding some color commentary to our presentation today. She's the chief of our data analytics here at the firm. Janelle Callis is one of our frequent speakers. Janelle is also spends a lot of time in the due diligence area, and that's what she's going to speak of today. Janelle's chemical engineering background, does a lot of work for chemical engineering related fields. And then we have Andre Murray, who's one of our principals out in our Silicon Valley office in San Jose. Andre is going to be speaking today about portfolio curation and how that's used in landscaping and benchmarking and comparing stuff, and talk about the tools and discuss that. And then last but not least, we got Tom Marlowe, who's from Black Hills IP, former chief patent counsel, Fairchild Semiconductor. Tom's going to talk again about tools that we use for examiner analytics and also firm analytics. And again, we've got a lot of subject to cover here. This is kind of a condensed version of other topics we've covered in more detail in other webinars, and you can look those up on our website if you want to watch them. And without further ado, we're going to hit it over to Janelle Callis to get us rolling. Janelle, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. Could I get the next slide? Yes, I'm going to talk about patent due diligence, and it will be a case study on patent portfolio acquisition targeting and due diligence on that acquisition target. The general purpose of patent due diligence is to analyze a patent portfolio to determine whether it supports particular business objectives. Next slide. I'm first going to cover kind of a bare bones checklist for performing this type of due diligence, and then look at some of the reports that one can generate as a result. The most important thing or bullet point for performing acquisition due diligence is to identify all of the patents and patent applications in the portfolio. This may sound easy, but it isn't necessarily. The first step in doing this is to check the assignments of issued patents and patent applications, and in particular, check the recorded assignments of issued patents and patent applications. For a small portfolio, it's possible to do this manually by going initially to what we do, to the USPTO assignment database, checking chain of title, and making sure that everything is in order. For large portfolios, I use Black Hills IP. They are the masters of database scraping, and they can be of powerful assistance in obtaining the assignment data that is needed to perform these checks. For countries where which have a different language and where we do not have language expertise, I do rely upon foreign associates or local counsel in the countries of interest. Next slide. One thing that I would say with respect to the assignment check is that I've never done an assignment analysis that did not uncover some significant problems, either in assignments that weren't done at all, were not recorded, were assigned to the wrong entity. All kinds of things can happen. Early in my career, when access to databases was much more restrictive because their technology wasn't available, I had an instance where the target company did not disclose foreign, especially Japanese patents, and we did in our due diligence. And when we asked the target why they did not disclose, they confessed that they were planning on starting up a competitive business once the sale was done and outsource the manufacturing to Japan. So that's pretty dramatic. Usually you don't find things that dramatic, but it's a critically important part of the due diligence. Once that's done, the next important thing is to check payment of annuities and maintenance fees. Again, we rely on Black Hills IP for their data scraping expertise. For small portfolios, I use Derwent Innovation, but it's also possible to use Acclaim IP. They have this information. Patent expiration dates, I have also used Derwent Innovation, and they're pretty good, but where I don't think they are precise is in determining patent expiration dates for issued patents having a terminal disclaimer. I think, I don't know of software that can do this. So we tend to look at it manually, at least for the most important patents. It's important to identify abandoned patent applications. Again, can be done manually for a small portfolio or using Black Hills IP for a large portfolio. And determine the life left on issued patents that are not expired. As I mentioned, Derwent Innovation and Acclaim IP provide that type of information. Next slide. The next task, once that background has been done, is to identify patent families by priority across countries and by subject matter. And for this, by priority, I've typically used Derwent Innovation search engine because there I can put in some keywords along with the priority date and come up with the a pretty complete picture of the patent family. And then the next step is to identify the patent families of particular interest. This you may be able to get from the target company. If not, your client should be able to provide some information so you can generate keywords, and within that universe of target patents, identify which patent families are of greatest interest. Especially for those families, I do look at backward and forward citations, and I use Derwent Innovation search engine for this also. There may be other products that can do this, but I use Derwent. And the next step is to review and analyze claims in patent families of interest. This is in particular reviewing the countries covered, the remaining term, and the scope of the claims. Next slide. Okay, that is a bare bones description of a checklist. There are a lot of other factors, but I think if you start with those things, you'll be in a pretty good position to do whatever else is needed. There are certain reports that you can generate for your client that may be of interest in and useful in visualizing the data that you're obtaining. One, top patenting countries for a particular portfolio. This is generated from a claim IP. Next slide. Data charting, the priority date, filing date, published and grant dates of patents in a portfolio. This also comes from a claim IP. Next slide. Top classifications, again, comes from a claim IP where you rank by USPTO classes. Next slide. Portfolio evolution by class. I believe this one also comes from a claim IP, but it shows changes in the portfolio over time on the basis of the class of the various inventions. Next slide. Top art unit and tech center. Again, this goes to kind of the substantive aspects of the patent portfolio. Next slide. Forward and backward citations. Forward citations indicate possible targets for acquisition perhaps or infringement actions. Backward citations are cautionary. They may indicate possible infringement. Further research is necessary, but it's useful to investigate further when you see in particular a large number of backward citations to certain companies. Next slide. Okay, patent score. This is an acclaim IP product, and it provides a score based upon citation, legal score, technology score. It can be useful to provide some qualitative data. Next slide. A slide or a study of US maintenance fees by calendar year gives your clients some idea of when maintenance fees are due next and the amount of fees that will have to be paid. Next slide. Company level analysis can also be useful in providing your final report to your client, looking at filing trends, key technology features, portfolio characteristics, expired versus active, pending case trend, abandonment rate, claim scope, notable patents, and technology filing trends. And I believe that this type of report, it can be generated from a variety of sources. I think this one came from Anaqua. Next slide. And the SWOT analysis, looking at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of a particular portfolio. And this slide was generated by software from Anaqua. Again, this is a very brief overview of due diligence, but it perhaps hopefully provides a starting place for performing analysis and due diligence. I'll turn it over next to Sunil Arora, who's going to talk about FTOs.
Thanks, Janelle.
Here.
Okay, thanks, Janelle. I think that was a great overview of diligence topics, and I am going to give a quick overview of freedom to operate, which is sometimes part of a due diligence analysis from either side of either the acquiring party or the party being acquired. And so I'll be discussing this briefly, and I will try to focus on the digital transformation aspects of this, although I'll give a little bit of overview about the process itself. So next slide. So just in terms of some preliminary considerations for FTO, maybe I should start out by just noting what FTO is. FTO, freedom to operate analysis, is really about risk mitigation, about third-party patents, and what is the risk of releasing a product or developing a product that risks infringing third-party patents. And the thing about FTO in the modern era is that there's lots of patents out there, so it's a complicated question, and there's a lot of, there's usually a lot at stake riding on the question. So it's helpful to have good digital transformation tools to actually handle the analysis of the question, because it can get quite expensive without tools to help you do that. So a lot of freedom to operate is about the context of what is the context of the freedom to operate problem that's being handled here. Is it a diligence investigation, like Janelle was talking about? Is it an R&D project? And if it's an R&D project, has the product already been developed such that it is a true freedom to operate investigation where you're actually comparing a product to third-party patents that are out there? Or is it more prospective in nature, in which case it may be a landscape sort of a project where you're looking at features that you think might be going into a product and you're trying to mitigate risk prospectively. And the nice thing about some of the tools that are available and what I'll be talking about is that you can actually use the tools efficiently to switch back and forth, to start some landscaping earlier and then shift it over to actual freedom to operate once the information becomes available. So a lot of this is about scope, it's about timing, and it's about efficiency, and the tools are just crucial for all of that. And so having the tools, and understanding what the client's budget expectations are is very important. And at the firm here, we always try to leverage domain expertise of the client to use that budget wisely. So there's different ways to divide the work between the technical team at the client and the law firm. Next slide. So I think this slide is a little bit repetitive of what I was just speaking to in terms of determining what the context is and what the client goals are, and also scoping the project. And what I've learned over the years from doing a lot of these projects is scoping the project is just crucial to actually staying on the budget and actually getting value out of the project, and in terms of giving information back that's an appropriate level of risk mitigation for the budget that's available. So knowing as much as you can and gathering that information about the product or the technology to be cleared, deciding on what the geographical coverage of the project should be, whether you're going to limit the investigation to just identified competitors or anybody that might be out there in terms of third parties. Those sorts of considerations early on are crucial to a successful project. Next slide. So this is an overview slide that describes the FTO process of the initial search and review, and then subsequent searches, and then analysis. So those are the different phases of the FTO investigation. And setting up the nature of the project and identifying the context and the goals, that's really crucial for the next stages. And the intermediate stage of subsequent searches is important to kind of boil down those many patents into a manageable number that can actually be analyzed effectively, and the ones that are really worth taking a deeper dive into. So the time that's spent in terms of deciding who's going to perform the search, whether it is somebody on the client side or on the law firm or an external search provider, is part of that. But regardless, the time spent designing the search strategy is really, really important in order to make sure that you're getting good results and efficiently using the subsequent stages in the process. Next slide. So the previous slide had to do with the searching aspect and the design of the FTO process, but there's a lot of work that gets done in terms of reviewing the results, and it's typically a staged approach of trying to filter out patents that show up in your search that really aren't worth too much further analysis versus ones that are going to require a deeper dive. So typically what we'll do is we'll work with the client to narrow down at the different stages the results to a manageable list and come up with a key list of key patents for further review. And also, during this whole time we're asking what's the relevant output, and a lot of that depends on the nature of why we were doing investigation in the first place. Next slide. So the deliverable types can range from everything from a formal FTO memo. They can be some kind of a claim mapping analysis using our ClaimBot tool, which I'll be talking about and actually focusing on. If it's in the due diligence context, a lot of times we have clients that are asking us to do pitch decks. So when they're seeking funding or that sort of thing, we are usually integrating, a high-level FTO result into the pitch deck and combining it with, what is the value proposition of the company that seeks funding or seeks to be acquired. You can also provide a list of constraints or a list of questions for the target. Those are different types of deliverables that come out of an FTO sort of context. Next slide. And so this is what I want to spend a little time on, since the seminar here is about digital transformation. One of the tools that we use in our practice is this interactive claim map, which is super efficient, lets us handle a lot of different information really effectively. And we can actually deliver a interactive claim map and pre-digest that list of patents into a list of what we call scope concepts, and then sit down with engineers and walk through the scope concepts. And if I could just get the screen for a second, I will share my own screen and show you an example of this. So our this is an output of our claim mapping software, which we've referred to as ClaimBot. And basically what it is, once we do get a culled list of key patents, we, the attorneys at Schwegman, will sit down and come up with this list of scope concepts. So we'll pre-digest the claims. We'll actually look out over the entire result set of patents and come up with, common scope concepts, and identify which claims pertain to which scope concept. So here you have basically in this column here, a list of scope concepts that have been pre-digested by a Schwegman attorney. And then here you can see we have different patents and different independent claims of different patents. And so what we'll do is we will pre-digest the big pile of patents, and we will work with the technical team, and we'll ask them with respect to each scope concept, what is the relevance? Is it something that you're going to include in your first generation product? And if so, we'll rank that a 3. If it's something that's not included in the first generation, but it might be in a next generation product, we will rank that as a 2. And if it's something that we're clear of, we'll rank that as a 1. So as we ask these questions, we can basically change these rankings on these sorts of things. And you can see that as I change the ranking, the results change. So if I rank this a 2 instead of a 3, assuming that it's not going to be in the current product, then you can see that all these claims accordingly get mapped to that sort of a ranking. And so it has this tri-level logic that we have here that's embedded into this, and you can treat multiple patents in parallel just by running through and asking these questions. And if you need to get to the actual claim information, that's actually a separate part of the spreadsheet. So you can do the deeper dive if you need to, and you can actually memorialize the results as well in the spreadsheet. So this is, from my perspective, it's a really good tool for quickly analyzing a large group of patents and saving our technical team from having to, actually walk through the patent claims themselves by doing a little bit of pre-digesting. It's a really efficient, both for the attorney and for the technical team. And our clients seem to really enjoy this approach. And that is it for my portion of the presentation.
Hey, thanks, Anil. I think we're going over to Tom Marlowe next.
All right. Listening to Janelle talk about assignments and chain of title diligence brought back some, I don't think fond is the word, but maybe troubling memories of doing. I can remember one particular divestiture we were doing. This was a portfolio that came as part of a company that we had acquired. And we were divesting it, and the deal got held up because there was some, let's just say, uncleanliness in the chain of title. Oh, by the way, I think we might be sharing the wrong screen here. I think you've got the control screen versus the. Anyway, I'll go into the story real quickly here. There was the chain of title was not super clean on a few of the patents, and we had to get confirmatory assignments from some of the inventors so that the deal wouldn't get held up. And it ended up having to get private investigators hired to go out and find one of the inventors. He wasn't even in the industry anymore. He'd become like a preacher or a minister in some small village. Needless to say, it was a lot of effort just to get a signature on an assignment that could have been cleaned up a lot easier, and probably could have been dealt with at the time of the acquisition originally, when the inventor was still with the company. So I second every piece of the benefit of doing those analyses early and often. Now, on my topic here, when it comes to prosecution data analytics, there's really two primary uses. One of these is going to be for prosecution workflow, examiner analytic type views, and the other is for say law firm or practitioner analysis. And in that scenario, you're aggregating prosecution data across a firm or for a particular practitioner to see trends in activity. This might be tendency to use interviews, how many office actions until allowance, use of extensions, how often matters go into RCE, the type of data that ends up being useful for evaluation, auditing, that type of thing. Let's go on to the next slide. In a prosecution workflow, of course, analytics can be useful to drive decision making, to drive strategy. And the most popular of these, and certainly the most prevalent, are examiner and art unit analytics. All right, let's go on to the next slide. So examiner or prosecution oriented analytics really end up being used to get a better picture of the possible road ahead. So what you may be facing going forward, to drive more informed choices, which may include, go no-go decisions or prosecution strategies. So going an appeal route versus an RCE, and add a little bit more data on that end. Okay, on the next slide here, let's take a look at a few of the options that are out there. Now, I'm going to quickly go through a few of them. Many of the analytics that are available from different sources give much of the same data in one format or another. Some have high points. But kind of at the end of the day, it comes down to what works for your own kind of personal or firm workflow and preferences. So at its simplest, we go to the patent office, and you can, the patent office has a system called PEDS, that's the Patent Examination Data System, where you can search through applications by examiner, and you can take a look at the status of the matters that they're on, and you can kind of manually dig through these and get some information about how an examiner likes to examine. This is interesting, it's free, it's kind of time taking though. All right, if we go on to the next slide, here's a tool, Patent Proofer. This is brought to you by the folks from Harity and Harity. A couple of the example data that we're seeing here are comparing examiner rates versus art unit rates for different metrics. So appeal brief success rate, board decision success rate, is this examiner more lenient or tougher than the rest of the art unit? Gives you an idea of what you might be facing. Of course, we all know patents are, every one of them is unique and individual, and every claim set similarly. So it's a piece of data at the end of the day, and it should be taken kind of in that light. Additionally, here we're seeing interview success rates, final rejection, and allowance rates. If we go on to the next slide, we'll take a look at a tool from PatentBox. Some additional analytics that we're seeing here are kind of a high level grant rate difficulty. It's a data point, a timeline, so you can get a sense of not only rates, but also how long it might take you to get to kind of a final decision. One of the things that I like with this tool is the appeal history. Here we can see for a number of matters that this examiner has handled, we can see kind of the flow from notice of appeal. If we're looking at that first line, notice of appeal, appeal brief, answer, reply, and then examiner review, reversed. So if I see ones that kind of fit the pattern that a case that I'm handling might be in, then I can dig in and say, well, all right, what arguments worked for cases that this examiner was handling, and maybe what arguments didn't. Did it help to cite case law? Did it not help to cite case law? Did the examiner, did it work with an approach that looked like XYZ or ABC? And you can start to get some useful information to drive prosecution strategy from some of that data. If we go to the next tab, obviously I'm partial to this company, but Black Hills, we make our own examiner analytics, very similar to what you see from other sources. It's taking a look at the examiner, comparing them to the art unit, comparing them to the tech class, comparing that examiner to the PTO as a whole, so you can get a sense of their trends. Also, I don't think the chart is on here, but showing what might be currently on the examiner's plate at the moment. Does it make sense to file? If it's light, do we want to file a response sooner or later? And you can start to work timing into those decisions. All right, let's go to the next slide here. I think I've got one more. SmartPath, another analytic provider. I pulled out one of their charts that I thought was an interesting visual to see here for a particular examiner, what the routes to disposition, allowance or abandonment typically are. So you can see you do have some first action allowances. That's kind of the dark gray bar at the top. Some go non-final to allowance. Actually, fewer than I would expect go non-final allowance, and even non-final final allowance ends up being pretty small. So you get a sense of, okay, if I want to get something through with this particular examiner, maybe my best bet is to focus my claims and amend once to get to allowance, because if I go further than that, the paths start to thin out. All right, so of these options, obviously, like I mentioned, there's a number that are out there. You can kind of pick and choose what will work, but these can be helpful in determining the strategy that you're going to use. And I think I mentioned earlier using these analytics to drive, obviously, decision making, which includes go, no go type decisions. And I want to make sure that I'm clear here that I wouldn't necessarily recommend using these as the only driver of a no-go type decision. If other analysis is giving me an indication that this matter is of, that I'm handling is of lower value, then I like to take a look at this examiner data as a way to maybe put me over the edge. Maybe I don't want an uphill battle on a low value matter. Flip side to that, if it looks like I've got a smooth road forward, or some, say, low cost options, I might decide to push forward a lower value matter too, depending. So it's kind of a small data point in that decision making plan. Now, the other analytics that you're going to want to include in order to back up those decision makings might be your business data, ties to product or revenue, and also analytic data. Some that's been mentioned a little bit on the call: forward and backward citations, analysis to tell you whether competitors are citing this matter or its family. Basically, I want to understand its value or the matter's relevance, then I'll layer this in for that kind of decision whether or not I want to move forward. And that kind of is the use of prosecution and specifically examiner analytics in what you might call a modern prosecution workflow. And now, as long as we're on the topic of strategic decisions and business value, I think I'll hand the spotlight over to Andre to give us a little course on curation.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Good to. Yeah, well, I think keeping in mind a lot of the tools that that have been discussed previously, I'm going to be kind of diving into a little bit, how do we use those tools practically in this overall concept of IP asset curation. So kicking things off, I just also want to give a definition for curation. So next slide. So basically, dictionary definition here is really that curation is this the action or process of selecting, organizing, and looking after items in a collection or an exhibition here. So I think the thing to keep in mind here is that your IP portfolio, your patent portfolio, really is a collection of assets. And much as you would look after any other collection of assets, be it your investment portfolio or the like, you really want to do this in an educated way. And again, a lot of the tools you discussed before, I think, really provide input into this process. So I'm going to kind of walk us through a typical kind of curation process, or a way of looking at IP portfolio or patent portfolio curation, and specifically, where would a landscape map come in, or where would a claim map come in, or where would the examiner analytics that Tom discussed, or an FTO, kind of come in that Sunil discussed. So if we could go to the next slide. I really just wanted to show here really the steps in curation, and with respect to a patent portfolio. And you can perform curation, and you should perform curation at each of these steps. So the first one being pre-filing, making filing decisions on which ideas that surface up you file on. Also, during prosecution of patent applications through the patent office, and also post allowance. So I've kind of got a curation circle over there, you can see, which really starts off with, the idea of kind of categorizing, then ranking, and then actioning. And the actioning, depends on, and that's really where the curation kind of hits the rubber hits the road there. So, for example, in the pre-filing, obviously your actions are going to be, are you going to approve this disclosure for filing, or are you going to decline it? Or, are you perhaps going to keep it as a trade secret? Actions during prosecution, during curation also may be, well, we're going to abandon a case, but also there might be other decisions like, oh, we're going to, RCE this, or we're going to file, multiple continuations on it if it turns out to be a particularly valuable family or particular case. And then, post allowance, your actions may, typically are going to be, do we pay the annuity fee or the maintenance fee? Do we not? Do we allow it to go abandoned? Or, is there perhaps some third party that may be interested in this asset, and do we divest it? So all of those are, they're different actions that are performed at each of these steps, but the kind of categorization and ranking that we're able to do using the tools we've discussed, the landscape maps, the claim maps, and all these analysis tools really educate that action process. The other one I would also point out with any, as with your investment portfolio, your degree of certainty as to perhaps the ranking or value of any asset tends to kind of increase as time passes. So when you approve an application or an idea for to be covered in a patent application, you're really probably taking an educated guess, because a lot of the the business value of that asset may not be apparent at that point, and you're going to end up filing a lot of large companies will typically end up filing a lot of patent applications, which they're kind of betting in on different technologies or different products being successful, but as time progresses, obviously you're going to get a lot more clarity as to was that product successful? Was that technology, adopted? And also, obviously there's going to be prior art's going to surface. So the business value will become a lot more apparent, both from a, purely a business point of view, but also kind of from a legal point of view. You may have a technology that's very valuable, but there's a lot of prior art and you can't get any meaningful protection. So, just to point out there that as the certainty of the value of an IP asset increases over time, you really want to, as part of a curation process, be doubling down, I guess, on assets that are valuable, for example, by aggressively filing continuations, or on the other hand, really just pruning them and abandoning them and performing some portfolio hygiene as you move through those various steps there. So next slide, please. Yeah, so I think on patent portfolio curation, I really think a good way to approach it is the why, what, how outlook on it, and really the why, asking why are we building this patent portfolio? What is going to be the return on investment? And then the what being what assets do we need in the portfolio to achieve the why, and then the how being practically how do we build the patent portfolio to maximize the kind of return on investment over there. Very often we're asking these questions at a portfolio level, but also it could be at a patent family level, or even at an individual patent case level. And also the whys and the whats and actually the hows can change significantly over time, and these need to be revisited with a fair amount, with a fair regularity and frequency. Business conditions could change dramatically for a company, or a new competitor could arise, or could pivot into a new product area or something like that. So this is something that needs to be revisited continually. If we can move on to the next slide. So I think an important question here is really to articulate why are you building a patent portfolio. And I'll typically ask this question of clients when they first engage with us, or even pose that question to some of our clients, larger clients who may have really thought of this, but I think it's really helpful to us as patent counsel to understand what the corporate perspective is on why do we have a patent program. And there are typically there may be multiple reasons why, but I think it's very good for to have kind of articulated and memorialized the why, perhaps in writing. If we could move on to the next slide, I've got some examples of why do you have a patent portfolio. And any particular company may go yes to all of these, but some may have a greater weight than others. So for example, if it's an early stage company, the one on the bottom left over there, valuation, maybe, yeah, we're really looking to bolster our valuation over here. Whereas a larger company may be typically more concerned with freedom to operate and defensive reasons. So they might get a higher weight over there. But all of those are good reasons why. But I think it is helpful, particularly when as having an input to your curation process to clearly understand why you are building your patent portfolio. We can move on to the next slide. So, the next question is, given the why we're building the patent portfolio, what assets do we need to put in that portfolio? And the claim maps and the landscaping maps that we've discussed earlier can be an important input into the process for identifying what. So if we go to the next slide, Here I've kind of defined, your process of defining what assets you need. You typically have a bunch of inputs and you're going to have a bunch of outputs. And the inputs may be, a business landscape, who are your competitors, who's active in this technology area. The business landscape can then provide input into your patent landscapes, where you're kind of really looking at who owns what IP in which area, and then also that can in turn provide input into which resources do you need, budget, people resources and technology resources. And very often those technology resources, if you're kind of setting up a patent program, that is where you may want to, subscribe to some of these services we discussed before, or, approach your patent attorneys and going, well, we need, we're going to need these landscape maps or these claim maps, on a regular basis to help us figure out what. And then your outputs would typically be, objectives for the, and goals. Like we want to, so an example there may be, we've defined 10 technology areas and we want to be dominant in 3 of those. And here, here are the 3 tech areas that we really want to own. We're going to cede the other 7 to competitors, but as long as we own those 3, we're good. And that's our objective. And then the goal may be we want to, file a certain number of patents in each of those tech areas for example. If we could move on to the next slide, I've just got an example here of, what type of business landscapes that you may want to generate. And we'll sometimes work with an outside consultancy or, information provider to really, for a particular company, identify, the market, who are the players, what are the technology areas there, what are their products, and just so we know, who's who in the zoo. Often it's kind of interesting to me, particularly for early stage companies that may not be fully aware of who the incumbents are in the market, and and who the players are, and all of that type of stuff. And even for clients that do have this information internally, and it's really useful to be able to communicate this to your patent attorneys, so they're also thinking along these lines and can help you make better decisions if they know what the business landscape is. So next slide is, as I mentioned before, we can take the business landscape and turn it into patent landscapes. And I think we've looked at a lot of these in previous presentations and earlier in the in this presentation. You could have technology landscapes, who looking at a particular technology, who owns what. You could have a particular competitive landscape. Here are certain competitors, what do they own? And one interesting one is also kind of benchmarking landscapes that we do for certain clients, which is, we just want to see what other people in our industry are doing. We don't compete with them, but we just want to gather some information about their patenting activities, just so we can kind of judge how we're performing. So I've got a few examples of benchmarking outputs that we'll discuss later, but for the next slide, I just want to really go into the, this is an example of a SWOT analysis. So where we talked about taking, for the what, where we take the inputs and turn them into goals and objectives, we found that a SWOT analysis is really a good way to do that. And, in this slide over here, you'll see that the, competitive intel, which would be those 2 landscapes I previously discussed, are input into this process, with landscape analytics. And that really, turns the, the threats and opportunities really be where you express that in terms of your objectives and the goals that we discussed, in the previous slides over there. So the next few slides, if we could move on to those, give some examples, I think, of some interesting benchmarking landscapes or charts that we've generated in the past. And again, what this one does over here is compares patent filings for different companies since founding. Your client may come in and go, hey, I just want to see how we're comparing in our first 5 years of existence relative to these companies. So here again, what we've done is really just showed at year 1, where red may be a competitor company and the blue charts are or typically the client would be a red and the blue might be a competitor. for another benchmark company, we can kind of show here, at year 1 of founding, year 2, year 3. So that's always a useful input. The next slide, please. Yeah, so this also shows, for various companies at IPO, how many patents or did the company have? And again, always, some companies, typically the underwriters may ask, what's your IP position? So we'll sometimes get this question from clients who are looking to list as like, well, how many patents should we have? There's no right answer to that, but often just showing, hey, well, here are some of the companies when they IPO'd. This is how many patents they had. Next slide. Yeah, so this is also again from years of founding for different companies. And basically, I think they're, the chart over here shows just founding date and year of first patent filing. So if you look at the bottom there, you'll see Facebook, was founded in 2004 and filed their first patent in 2006. But this chart shows, progression from year of founding, at each anniversary, how many patents did that particular, company have. So you can see there that Snapchat, basically was founded in 2012, filed their first patent that very same year, and have been, growing a patent portfolio, at a steady clip there. But if you look at the red one, which is Zynga, you'll see, founded in 2007, filed their first patent in 2010, but then very aggressively ramped up their patent program over there. Again, there's no wrong or right way to do it. It's just interesting to see, how peer companies may have approached things. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this also just shows, for competitors, the number of patents per $1 billion in market cap. Again, it's another benchmark that large companies may have to see how they're tracking relative to some peer companies. Next slide. And here's another interesting comparative, which is showing, for companies' patent portfolios, how many of their current assets were organic versus how many were acquired. And you can see, for example, there that Twitter, has acquired probably 75% of their patent portfolio. So obviously, decided at some point they were light, and then went out and just bought a bunch of patents on the secondary market. So another kind of interesting data point. Next slide. Yeah, so basically, as I mentioned before, you can have these objectives and goals as output, and the objectives can be at a portfolio level, case level, whereas goals, could specify how many patents do we want to file. Are we going to file a large number of patents and pay less? We can attach less value to kind of quality, or we're going to be really filing very low, a minimal number of patents, but making sure that those patents are extremely high quality. Typically most companies are kind of striking a balance between the two, because as I mentioned before, there's a lot of uncertainty. So you have to file a certain quantity to, you're not quite sure which ones are actually going to turn out to be valuable. So next slide, please. Yeah, so, basically, how do we build the kind of how do we build the patent portfolio to maximize the return on investment? And the next slide, I'll kind of just point out a certain view of how this can be achieved. So next slide. Yeah, so if you look at kind of a basic patent management or patent curation flow, there might be, you're looked at, you're obtaining assets, you're managing assets, and using assets. And typically for obtaining assets, you can obviously obtain them organically, inorganically, which is buying them, or you can sometimes even join a defensive patent aggregator. But in all of those decisions, your landscapes will provide input into that process. Also, managing assets. This is really where I think these tools come into play very heavily, with inventory, organizing, prioritizing, and actioning them. We could go on to the next slide, which I just wanted to show, a cycle of how do you obtain organic patents within your organization? And typically there's going to be this process of evangelizing it, the patent program, and educating inventors. You're going to harvest ideas, you're going to rank and rate them, and then you're going to action them. Do we file, no file, trade secret? And again, the tools we discussed can really be important in kind of the ranking process over there, with looking at legal criteria, business criteria, and all of that. So just within that cycle, just a real, just focusing on where you would typically apply those tools most heavily. And then my final slide here is just an example of the claim maps that Sunil demonstrated in his presentation. In addition to doing the freedom to operate analyses that Sunil demonstrated there, we can really use a tech category functionality in that tool to help organize and also record ranking and rating of an entire patent portfolio. So you can see there, particularly for tech categories, there are 5 tech categories. There's an importance, is this a high, medium, low case? What products does it map to? And also a status. So this is, we find this a very useful way to kind of capture and memorialize that information. And then you can also, when you're doing the FTO, or almost the reverse of that, if you're doing an offensive analysis using a claim map, this type of tech category information can also help triage a large portfolio very quickly. And that is all I had. So with that, I'll hand it back to Michelle or Steve, who is ending next.
Thank you, Andre. And you still had 2 minutes left. So I'm, disappointed you didn't fill your entire space there of your time up. But
I must have that's a little, probably rushed through a few slides too quickly, but
hey, I was looking to see if we had any. We had one question I answered, typing out the answer. And that question was really about how ClaimBot works. And ClaimBot has, it's a complete package of tools, if you will, that ingest patents, help us organize them into portfolios, label them, map claims or scope concept on the claims. It can do keyword mapping automatically. It does a whole set of different things. It tracks, Claim Tracker is another part of ClaimBot, which keeps track of all the actions that have been made against a patent, what's been cited, what remarks have been made. So it's a big, huge package full of functions, features, and tools that we use then to help us generate outputs that are valuable for customers. See if there's one more question here. ClaimBot is proprietary to SLW, but I do know that Black Hills IP has their own version of that they can use to provide services. So if you're interested, and there is another commercial tool out there. Andre, I'm blanking on the name of it right now. It's that can do some ClaimBot like functionality, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the name of it, but
I think I'm joining you in that.
Yeah, it's a good tool. If anybody's interested in that, or maybe if anybody's listening in that remembers that, they could pop it into the Q&A. But it's a very nice tool as well, and it mimics some of the features that ClaimBot has. So I'll have Michelle send that out because it'll pop into our head in about 2 seconds after we finish this presentation. So with that, anyways, oh, here we go. Okay, so here's another question. Oh, go ahead, Sunil.
Steve, I think that, was it Clearstone IP?
Clearstone IP, yeah, excuse me. That's what we're trying to remember.
Yeah, that's the one, Sunil. Yep.
Yeah, and we've looked at that and even used it a little bit so far. It's a very nice tool, and it has some ClaimBot features in it and some additional things too. So you should definitely check it out. And they'd be happy to hear from you. And they've got a number of customers. We got another questions in terms of challenges we foresee over the next 5 years. You know, that's a good question. I think I would say, and I'll let the other panelists weigh in on this, but as far as challenges go, I think our biggest challenge now is always challenges kind of come in a couple of flavors. One is trying to do more with less. Customers, clients all want to get more done with fewer resources. And so using these tools that we've touched on today becomes a vital part of that. Little plug for Black Hills IP for Tom Marlowe. For example, they've got some phenomenal automation that eliminates labor in some of the areas that are very difficult, like docketing, and their renewals tool is very helpful. For the firm, we've been developing tools for years and we keep using them, but there's so many other tools out there that we're agnostic, and we reach out and use as many tools as we can. It's hard to keep on top of all of them, but we've got, I think our major initiatives more recently is just keeping up with all the analytics tools, but also using automated claim or patent drafting tools, which we've been heavily focused on trying to exploit. Sunil, Andre, do you have any comments on that?
Well, yep. Yeah, Steve, and I think you're right. In the next, I think we're continually being challenged, and our clients are continually being challenged to justify their patent portfolios and to make them valuable. And just as we see in the stock and investment industry, there are a lot of tools emerging to help people identify trends and valuable patents, and do that work in kind of a quickly and efficiently. I think that's going to be one of the challenges, and I think a lot of the tools we've discussed here are in the digitalization are really going in that direction. Just helping people better manage their portfolios and maximize the value of these things.
Go ahead, Sunil.
Yeah, I'd just add one comment to expand on what you said, Steve. There are so many tools that are available out there. And so here within the firm, like Steve says, we're very agnostic to the different tools, but the philosophy is to aggregate the best information from the best tools and to push it out to the best attorneys here within the firm, to let them focus on the substantive tasks and to leverage that information to really get the most out of the substantive work that they're doing. And in terms of the next, the future in the 5 to 10 years, anytime you have all these tools, it really is about making the tools talk to each other and common data interchange formats for making that easy to do. So that to me is the future challenge.
And I will, I guess we'll finish on this, which is these APIs are extremely important for tools. The vendors that are offering them are, like CPA Clarivate and AppCall, and CPI has some pretty good APIs. These are just for the core system tools. Patrick's. So these companies are really helping connect things together so we can move the information around easily. There's a lot of wasted effort in retyping information or reformatting it. So I think on the back office side, that's a big deal. And then on the actual production of services, Sunil mentioned getting the information to the attorneys that they actually can use to improve their efficiency and the quality of the responses is still a lot of low-hanging fruit there. Sunil's been doing a lot of that work, and Andre, by the way, has been doing a lot of the work on pushing any tool, but particularly drafting tools. So I think I want to, thank everyone, just to wrap it up, for listening in today. And I think there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up in the next 5 years. It's kind of a weird time to be a lawyer because you're inundated with tools, and people keep talking about how they're going to, eliminate part of your job. So, but I think what's happening is the parts of the practice that can be easily converted into automation are happening, but the core expertise of being a lawyer is still going to be with us for a long time to come. Hopefully they'll be doing a lot less busy work and just being able to think big thoughts. So with that, I'll wrap it up. Thanks to all the panelists. Very much appreciated. Again, there's a lot of work that goes into this. And so I appreciate everybody's contribution, and thanks everybody for showing up today. And Michelle, do you want to wrap it up?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. And the next episode of the Digital Transformation series will take place on August 12th, when we discuss an SLW digital transformation case study in billing, invoicing, client budgeting, and cost projection. You can find the registration page on the SLW Institute on the SLW website, and please keep an eye out for the email invitations as well. And if you know colleagues who would be interested, please do invite them. Thank you again for joining us, and be well.